Night falls over a Japanese village like a heavy, dark velvet. The sky swallows the stars, and the houses melt into the shadows of the mountains. Only a faint light might seep through the cracks of wooden shutters, but it too quickly fades, giving way to an empire of darkness. The village goes to sleep early, exhausted from a long day's work in the fields and on the slopes. In every home, families lay down on woven tatami mats, settling into their quilted futons. The breath of the sleepers is steady and rhythmic, like the very pulse of the earth. Into this solemn silence, this absolute darkness, he arrives, unseen and unheard. The only hint of his presence is a faint rustling against the wooden wall of a house. He moves carefully, step by step, his bare feet touching the cool earth, then the wooden veranda. Every creak, every clumsy movement is a risk. He makes his way to an entrance known only to him and slips inside. And just like that, he's in their world. A world where the most important and personal decisions are made without a word, in total darkness. This was the world of Yobai, an ancient Japanese tradition of night visits that persisted for centuries, defying official bans and the dawn of the modern era. It wasn't just a custom, but an entire framework for relationships, born from a paradoxical blend of strict social hierarchy and hidden personal freedom. Here, in the shadows of a patriarchal society where a woman's voice meant little during the day, her silence or lack thereof held all the power at night. The core principle of this world was simple. In the dark, all daytime conventions fall away. A person stands before another without social masks, fancy words, judgmental looks, or wealth. The choice is made not with the mind, but with the heart, with intuition, with an invisible pull. In this world, consent wasn't expressed with a yes, but in the absence of a no. On the surface, this was a Japan of established rules, where the head of the family held nearly absolute power, and marriages were often arranged by parents or matchmakers. A young woman had no say in her own destiny. But beneath this surface, at the very heart of rural life, Yobai subverted these rules from within. Its foundation rested on several pillars, each one stunning to the modern eye. First, the absolute darkness and silence. This wasn't just for secrecy, it was part of the ritual. A man would crawl or creep, his movements slow, his breath held. His only responsibility was to be there. The young woman he came for had to react just as silently. Not a single sound, except perhaps the beating of her own heart or the breath of the person beside her. This silence forced them to rely on other senses, the feeling of warmth, scent, intuition. Second, the unspoken complicity of the parents. Everyone slept in the same room, their futons laid out side by side. The parents knew what was happening. They could hear the quiet movements, sense the presence of a stranger in their home, but they pretended to be deep in sleep. They wouldn't move, speak, or open their eyes. This collective act of feigning sleep wasn't just turning a blind eye. It was the community's silent approval, an unwritten rule. To break that silence, to speak or show you were awake, was to shatter the system and drag it into the daylight, where other, stricter rules applied. Third, the absolute power of the woman. A man could arrive, make his way to her futon, and quietly lie down beside her, pulling the same blanket over himself. But what happened next was entirely up to her. Her answer was not a word, but an action, or lack thereof. If she didn't like the man, if she felt uncomfortable or afraid, she could simply turn her back to him. This was a silent rejection. If she felt bold enough, she could scream. A scream was an absolute veto, and the man was obligated to leave without questions, resentment, or any attempt to persuade her. Her scream was law, respected by the entire village. Her right to refuse was indisputable. This was the central paradox of that world. By day, a woman could be nearly powerless, her desires often ignored. But by night, her silent or spoken response held absolute authority. They weren't waiting for confessions under the stars, but for an honest answer from the body and soul in the dark. If the woman accepted her guest, the man earned the unspoken right to return. Repeated visits became a test of their connection. He would come on other nights, and each time the decision remained hers. These nights were a time of getting to know each other, not through conversation, but through sheer presence, warmth, and breath. A bond was built on a fundamental, physical, and emotional level. Once the night visits became regular, the relationship would step out of the shadows and into the light of day. The connection, born in darkness and tested by silence, took on a real form. The man who came by night took on responsibility. Society recognized this form of union, and a formal wedding ceremony wasn't always necessary to start a family. The result of the nightly encounters spoke for itself. For all its apparent freedom, Yobai followed strict internal rules. A man who established regular visits with one woman was expected to stop trying at other houses. The tradition encouraged not promiscuity, but the search for the right person. And no one gossiped about who was visiting whom at night. That part of life was protected by a collective silence. But the tradition of Yobai gradually faded away. As rural life changed, with migration to cities and official bans appearing in the 20th century, the practice became increasingly risky. By the 1970s, Yobai survived only in the most remote corners of Japan, disappearing along with the generation of elders who remembered its unwritten rules. The disappearance of Yobai is the loss of a unique path to human connection. In our modern world, oversaturated with information and superficial communication, Yobai offers a different perspective. That connection and trust are born in silence, that intuition is more important than words, and that consent can be an act of quiet acceptance. Today, the tradition has all but vanished, surviving only in stories and a few lingering rituals. Modern Japan lives by different rules: romantic dates, coffee shop meetups, and digital communication. The old rituals have given way to new forms of intimacy, but a memory remains. A memory that even in the strictest societies, there is always room for choice, trust, and silent consent. And so, an era faded into memory when the boldest declarations were made in total silence and the most important choice was made in the dark. The well-trod night paths are now lost to time, and the silent ritual has been replaced by the bright, noisy world of digital dating and public promises. Today, love seeks validation in words, in social media statuses, in photos put on display for all to see. And yet, deep in the collective memory, in old folk tales and the echoes of rituals, lives the shadow of Yobai, a reminder that true connection is born not from what is said, but from what is understood without words, in the shared breath of two people under a single blanket hidden by the night. This nearly lost knowledge lies dormant in the very soul of Japan, waiting, perhaps not for a return, but for a new appreciation in a world that may one day grow tired of its own noise.